A single photograph taken in 1888 in a small portrait studio in Richmond, Virginia. A black family dressed in their best clothes, looking straight into the camera with quiet dignity and strength. For more than 100 years, this image stayed forgotten in a dusty archive box. Just another old picture from the past that nobody noticed. But when modern scientists used high-tech imaging tools to study the mother's eyes, they found something truly amazing. A clear pattern in her irises that should not have been possible in a photo from that time. A rare genetic signature that reached back across the ocean, through centuries of pain and history, all the way to African royalty that the world had long forgotten. This was not just a simple family portrait. It was living proof of a proud bloodline that slavery had tried so hard to erase forever. If you want to discover how one old photograph changed history and reunited a family with their royal heritage, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button right now. You won't believe where this incredible story goes next. Dr. Maya Richardson stood in the quiet basement of the Smithsonian Institution. She was surrounded by stacks of cardboard boxes that smelled of dust, old paper, and the passage of time. For 3 long months, she had been working hard on the African American Heritage Photography Project. Her job was to sort through thousands of old images from the years right after the Civil War. Most of the photos were damaged, badly faded, torn, or almost impossible to recognize. But on this bright morning in March 2019, she opened one particular box labeled Virginia Studios 1890 and felt something shift inside her. The photograph she pulled out was remarkably well preserved, as if time had been gentle with it. It showed a family of 6, arranged in a formal studio pose. The painted backdrop behind them was a peaceful garden scene, very common in portraits from that era. The father stood tall and straight in a dark suit, his hand resting gently on the shoulder of his seated wife. 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, surrounded their parents. All of them wore their Sunday best clothes, neatly pressed and carefully chosen. Their expressions were solemn, dignified, and carried a quiet pride that felt almost royal. Maya lifted the photograph with great care and turned it over. On the back, she saw the photographer's stamp. J. Morrison Studio, Richmond, Virginia, September 1888. She had looked at hundreds of similar family portraits before, but this one felt different in a way she could not immediately explain. The way the family held their heads high, the straightness of their backs, and the calm strength in their eyes suggested a deep pride that went far beyond their everyday struggles in post-slavery America. She placed the image carefully on her light table and reached for her magnifying glass to begin her standard documentation process, noting the age, condition, number of subjects, and location. But the moment she leaned in closer, her breath caught in her throat. The woman seated at the center, the matriarch of the family, had the most striking eyes Maya had ever seen in any photograph from the 1800s. Even through the soft sepia tones and the technical limits of 19th century cameras, there was something unusual and almost luminous about them. A clarity and detail that simply should not have existed with the slow film and simple lenses of 1888. Maya sat back, frowning in confusion. She knew very well what early photography was like. Long exposure times made people sit perfectly still for minutes. Eyes in most old portraits looked dark, blurry, and lacked fine detail. Yet this woman's eyes were sharp, bright, and showed a distinct pattern in the irises that her magnifying glass could not fully reveal. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly noon. Her colleague, Dr. James Chen, who worked in the digital imaging laboratory upstairs, was exactly the person who could help. If anyone could bring out hidden details or prove she was imagining things, it was James. Maya slid the precious photograph into a protective sleeve and headed straight for the elevator. When she walked into the bright imaging lab, James looked up from his computer screen. He had worked with Maya long enough to recognize the excited, focused look on her face. "What have you got there?" he asked, pushing his chair back. "I'm not sure yet," Maya admitted honestly, placing the photograph gently on the flatbed scanner. But there is something very special about this woman's eyes. I need you to scan it at the highest resolution possible." James raised an eyebrow but did not ask too many questions. He had learned to trust Maya's sharp instincts over the years. He carefully adjusted the settings on the high-end archival scanner and started the process. The machine hummed softly as it captured every tiny detail of the 131-year-old image. 5 minutes later, the crisp scan appeared on his large monitor. James opened the file in specialized imaging software and began zooming in slowly on the matriarch's face. Maya stood right beside him, her hand gripping the back of his chair tightly. "There," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "Do you see it?" James leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing with concentration. He zoomed in even further until the woman's left eye filled the entire screen. What they both saw next made the room fall completely silent. The pattern was unmistakable: deep radial furrows, unusually clear structures, and a geometric arrangement of small crypts in the iris that looked almost too perfect. James opened another window and pulled up a genetic iris pattern database developed by the National Institutes of Health. He carefully input the pattern from the photograph, making small adjustments for the age and quality of the image. The software ran its comparison for about 30 seconds against thousands of known genetic markers. When the results finally appeared, James sat back hard in his chair, stunned. "Maya, this iris pattern is linked to a very specific and extremely rare genetic lineage," he said quietly. "It appears in less than 1% of the entire world population. According to the data, it is strongly associated with ancestral lines from West Central Africa, specifically the royal families of the pre-colonial Ndongo kingdom in Angola." Maya felt her heart racing with excitement and disbelief. "Can you be more specific?" James clicked through several more screens, studying the information carefully. "It matches the genetic signature of the Ndongo royal bloodline." 2 days later, Maya sat across from Dr. Patricia Okonkwo in a small, book-filled office at Howard University. Patricia was one of the leading experts in African-American genealogy, especially stories that reached back through the dark years of slavery. Her office walls were covered with old family trees, maps of the Atlantic slave trade, and photos of families she had helped reconnect with their lost roots. Maya had brought both the original photograph and James's detailed digital analysis. She watched as Patricia examined everything with the calm, respectful attention of someone who understood how fragile and precious these pieces of history truly were. "The iris pattern is really definitive?" Patricia asked, looking up from the genetic report. "According to the NIH database, yes," Maya confirmed. "This exact configuration is found, almost, only in descendants of the Ndongo royal family. The kingdom of Ndongo." "I know that history well," Patricia said gently. "Queen Nzinga, one of the greatest leaders Africa has ever known. She fought against Portuguese colonization for nearly 40 years with incredible courage." She looked back down at the photograph, studying the woman's face. "And you are telling me this woman, photographed in Richmond, Virginia in 1888, carries her bloodline?" "That is exactly what the genetic evidence is suggesting." Patricia sat quietly for a long moment, thinking deeply as she gazed at the matriarch's calm, dignified expression. "Do we have any names or extra information written on the photograph?" Maya shook her head. "Only the studio stamp. But I checked John Morrison's old records. On September 14th, 1888, he photographed the Thomas family, 6 people, at an address on Clay Street in Richmond. They paid $2 for the portrait, which was a lot of money for a black family at that time. They must have saved for months to afford it." Maya traveled to Richmond on a gray Thursday morning. The city had changed a lot since 1888, but many old brick buildings and church steeples still stood as quiet reminders of the past. She went straight to the Library of Virginia, where Patricia had arranged special access to city directories, census records, and property documents from the late 1800s. In the quiet research room, Maya found the 1880 directory listing for 412 Clay Street. Samuel Thomas, carpenter. Her hands shook slightly with excitement as she wrote it down. Moving to the 1880 census, she located Samuel, age 24. and his wife Grace Thomas, age 22, listed as a midwife and healer. 4 young children were also listed, the exact same ages and names that matched the 1888 photograph. Next to Grace's mother's birthplace, a small note said, "Unknown, possibly foreign." In 1880, that single word "foreign" for a black woman in Virginia was very unusual and hinted at a story that did not fit the normal pattern. Following Patricia's advice, Maya visited several historic black churches in Richmond. At Ebenezer Baptist Church, Reverend Marcus Williams, a kind man in his 70s, brought out old leather-bound ledgers. In the 1874 marriage records, she found Samuel Thomas married to Grace Olad on October 3rd. The name Oladell stood out immediately because it was not common in Virginia. In Grace's 1873 church testimony, it noted that she had unusual knowledge of healing herbs taught by her mother, who had passed away, and that Grace refused to speak about her origins. Back in Washington, Maya joined James and Patricia for a video call. Patricia shared new findings. A Portuguese slave ship named Esperanza had arrived in Charleston, South Carolina, from Luanda, Angola, in 1847. A woman and her young daughter were listed as a special acquisition and sold privately, not at the public auction. The woman had claimed to be of royal blood. The timing fit perfectly with Grace's birth. Around 1858 weeks later, Patricia discovered the woman's name was Nzinga. She claimed descent from the great Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba. She was sold again in 1852 to a tobacco plantation near Richmond. In 1858, Nzinga died while giving birth to a baby girl. The infant was Grace. An old letter from the plantation owner's wife described the newborn as beautiful with unusual eyes, and noted that the older daughter had strong healing knowledge. To make the royal connection undeniable, Maya and the team searched for living descendants. They traced the family line through later census records and located Dorothy Williams, a 76-year-old woman living in Philadelphia. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Robert Thomas, the oldest boy in the 1888 photograph. When Maya called Dorothy and told her about the discovered photograph and the surprising royal ancestry, the older woman's voice filled with emotion. She remembered family stories about Grace having healing hands and eyes that seemed to hold ancient knowledge. Grace had always told her children, "Remember that you come from kings and queens. Never forget that." 6 weeks later, Maya, James, and Patricia visited Dorothy's home. 3 generations of the family had gathered in the living room, eager to hear the truth. James showed the DNA results on his laptop. Dorothy's test matched the rare genetic markers from Grace's eyes, confirming a direct link to the Ndongo royal family and Queen Nzinga, roughly 7 generations earlier. Dorothy leaned forward and finally saw the faces of her great-great-grandparents for the first time. Tears ran down her cheeks as she traced her finger gently over Grace's image and those remarkable eyes. "She looks like my grandmother," she whispered, "and like my mother, and like my daughter." 3 months later, on a warm September afternoon exactly, 131 years after the original photograph was taken, more than 40 descendants of Samuel and Grace Thomas gathered at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. The restored 1888 photograph was now part of the permanent collection, displayed with all the historical documents and DNA evidence. Family members who had never met before hugged and shared stories. They stood together around a large screen showing the clear restored image of the Hearst ancestors. Many saw their own faces reflected in Samuel's strong posture or Grace's calm dignity. Some even shared the same striking eye pattern. Dorothy spoke warmly to the whole group. Grace never knew the full truth about her mother, but she carried that royal strength deep inside her. She passed down the knowledge of healing and the quiet pride to her children. Today, science and history have given us the proof our ancestors could only whisper about. We are not only survivors of slavery, we are the descendants of a warrior queen who fought empires. That pride belongs to every one of us now, and no one can ever take it away again. A young woman named Aaliyah who had inherited Grace's unusual eyes, smiled through her tears. I always felt there was something greater in our family story. Now we finally know. Marcus, Dorothy's grandson, raised his phone and took a new photograph of everyone standing together. A modern family portrait that echoed the one from 1888. History had come full circle. This time, they all knew exactly who they were and where they came from.